My brother invited us to stay rent-free, and now it feels like we're relying on you. Isla, I work in finance, while my husband, let's call him Bob, is a car mechanic. We live in my childhood home, but not the one where my parents reside. Instead, it's a family business that my father used to run. My brother was expected to take over, having studied economics and even attended Oxford. After working alongside our father for 5 years, my parents retired to Aspen, leaving the company in his hands. They passed the family home to me, and now I live there with Bob. The location is ideal, close to public transport, hospitals, and schools. We were grateful for this unexpected gift and had plans to expand our family. However, everything changed when my mother-in-law began dropping by frequently, probing about my parents' finances and their inheritance. It felt intrusive, and I never anticipated that our happy life would be disrupted this way. Not wanting to confront her directly, I replied casually, "I'm not really sure. I've never given it much thought. I got the house, so there might not be any money." Although I laughed it off, she persisted, saying, "That can't be true. Your parents are over 57. You never know what could happen. They must have discussed their assets with you." Her interest in our family's finances was palpable, and I suddenly felt she might be banking on my parents' wealth. I knew exactly how much I would inherit but opted to remain silent, believing it was better not to divulge this to my mother-in-law or even Bob, who was quite close to her. Just when I thought things couldn't get stranger, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family arrived unannounced one holiday morning at around 7 a.m. Movers in tow, ready to settle in. When I opened the door, confusion washed over me. "What are the movers doing here?" I asked, bewildered. That's when my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family cheerfully declared, "We've decided to move in today. Welcome us and take care of us." Their exuberance sent a chill down my spine. Bob was just waking up when I told him what was happening, and he shrugged it off. "What's the issue? If Mom and the others are moving in, this place is big enough for everyone." His nonchalance astonished me. Just as I was processing the shock of them moving in, my sister-in-law made an even bolder claim, stating, "Brother Isla invited us. Since he called, we won't be paying rent or utilities. We're depending on you, Isa." Meanwhile, my brother-in-law began picking out rooms for himself, announcing, "This room gets great sunlight. We'll take it. Bob, move your things to the hallway." I felt completely at a loss. Although the house belonged to me, they were treating it like their own, entering and claiming rooms without so much as a "by your leave." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law seemed devoid of basic courtesy, especially my sister-in-law, who once rummaged through my bag without asking. If this continued, I'd be living in a nightmare. They were essentially invading my space, acting as if they owned the place. Normally, I pride myself on staying composed, but their brazen attitude pushed me over the edge. I couldn't take it any longer. I raised my voice, demanding they leave. To my shock, they responded with arrogance, telling me to leave instead. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp sting on my cheek. Did she just slap me? The realization hit me a moment later, leaving me stunned and in disbelief. The pain throbbed, and something inside me snapped. I couldn't live with people who treated me this way in my own home. This was my house, and I refused to let them live here like parasites. I made the decision to pack my belongings and leave. I needed to tell my family what was happening, so I rented a short-term apartment. From there, I would have to commute to work. When I broke the news to my parents over the phone, I sensed their anger, especially from my usually supportive father. He had always been kind, even with his strict CEO demeanor. I hated to burden my retired parents with my issues, but I felt I had no choice. My inherited home was being taken over while I stayed in a temporary apartment. I knew my husband and his family were enjoying my house as if it were their own. Following my brother and father's advice, I took action. A few days later, during my break, I checked my phone and saw a barrage of missed calls and messages from Bob. I understood immediately why he was trying to reach me. I had contacted the water and electric companies to disconnect the utilities. Our house relied entirely on electricity, and we hadn't installed solar panels, so there was no alternative power source. Given the heat, I imagined living without electricity and water was challenging for them. Just as I was about to ignore the calls, Bob rang me. "What's happening? There's no electricity, and the water isn't working. Did you stop the service?" His panicked voice made it clear he was worried. Since the house now belonged to me, I couldn't justify keeping the utilities on while I was away. It felt reasonable to turn them off and avoid unnecessary bills. But Bob was furious. insisting I renew the contracts immediately. Just because he wanted me to renew didn't mean I had to comply right away. I won't agree to renew the contracts just because they want me to. If they want to stay, they should use their own money. They keep insisting it's my house, so I should be the one to pay, but their words and actions don't match. I have no intention of renewing the contract or covering the bills. If they're unhappy with that, they should leave. As soon as I said that, I ended the call. My break was nearly over. Later, I received calls from my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law, all repeating the same request. They wanted me to reconnect the electricity and water because their room was uncomfortable without it. They complained about the inconvenience, but I thought it was their problem, not mine. After listening to their grievances, I stood firm and told them to handle it themselves before hanging up, convinced that their greed would eventually drive them away. To my surprise, even after a week, they showed no signs of leaving. Determined to take a firmer stance, I consulted my father's company lawyer and asked him to send a notice to my husband. The notice addressed the issue of trespassing since they had invaded my home without discussion. They had effectively forced me out of my own property, using it as if it belonged to them. Faced with their deceitful tactics, I hinted at the possibility of legal action. Curious and alarmed, my husband approached me, asking why I had received a document from a lawyer. He seemed taken aback by my decision to escalate matters. Knowing how much they valued their public image, I understood that the threat of a lawsuit weighed heavily on them. While they were unwilling to give up their current lifestyle, I knew they were likely scheming to convince me to let them stay as they were. Seeing through my husband's intentions, it was clear he was trying to manipulate the situation, but I refused to entertain their proposals. I didn't cave to his demands. In response, he lost his temper, forgetting he was at work, and shouted at me, telling me to stop acting high and mighty just because things had gotten complicated. He insisted I revert to how things were immediately and drop the idea of involving a lawyer. Yet, his angry outburst barely affected me. In fact, I found his phone call irritating, considering how audacious it was for him to try and take control of someone else's home. No matter how much he yelled, my stance remained unchanged. If he continued to occupy the property without my consent, I was resolute about taking legal action. I told him to think carefully before making any further moves. Despite his continued ranting, I ignored him and hung up, deeming it a waste of time. I had already consulted my lawyer about divorce. When I returned home, I noticed several missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I suspected they were reaching out to discuss how to settle this escalating situation. But I remained firm in my resolve to avoid wasting any more time. I decided to block their numbers, putting an end to their incessant calls. Faced with the prospect of legal action, my husband's proud family couldn't bear the pressure. They packed their bags and left my house. After their departure, the lawyer stepped in to facilitate smooth divorce negotiations. I seized the opportunity to hire a cleaning service, restoring my home to its sparkling condition. Living separately from my husband's family and in a monthly rental was a comfortable interim arrangement, but being back in my own home felt like a true blessing. The house did show signs of wear in some areas, which prompted me to consider renovations. Consulting with my father, he recommended a reliable contractor, and discussions about the renovations began. Living alone has proven incredibly comfortable. I'm no longer constrained by anyone's presence, free to lounge on the sofa without fear of reprimand. I can enjoy any meal without judgment. As I relish my current lifestyle, the prospect of renovating my home adds an exciting dimension to my newfound freedom. Then, out of nowhere, my ex-husband called me. Desperate, he began speaking without asking me first, sharing how his business was facing serious financial problems, resulting in a reduced salary. My mother-in-law was also unwell, preventing her from working. My sister-in-law and her husband were unable to contribute much, as he didn't have a stable job. Even though my sister-in-law was juggling multiple part-time jobs, most of her earnings went toward paying off the debts accumulated by my brother-in-law. The situation was truly tough, and my ex-husband was struggling to make ends meet. When I heard all this, I couldn't help but think, wow, really? Despite their financial struggles, my feelings haven't changed. They entered my home without permission, did whatever they wanted, and even tried to force me out. It was truly unbelievable. I felt no sympathy for them. Their difficulties were not my responsibility. They were family, and they needed to handle their issues on their own. My ex-husband grew even more anxious when I mentioned, "Don't say things like that. We're in real trouble. we might not even afford rent, and tomorrow we could struggle for food. Hey, we used to be a family, right? Please help us, he pleaded, his voice almost breaking. But I wasn't convinced. When I faced difficulties before, he didn't lift a finger to help. He and my mother-in-law had always looked down on me. It wasn't just them. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law had treated me poorly as well. They insulted me for my simple looks and old-fashioned beliefs, telling me to stay away because they thought my rigidity was affecting them. They didn't care how much it hurt me. My mother-in-law made things worse, pressuring me to have a baby as soon as possible. She forced strange herbal remedies on me, scheduled unnecessary doctor's appointments, and spread rumors among the neighbors that I was a barren wife. Looking back, it was a difficult situation. My marriage had no positives. My ex-husband, who was once kind, had become nothing more than his mother's puppet. On the first day my mother-in-law came to our house after we wed, I was away for an appointment. She became upset and cried to my husband, saying she wanted to see me but I wasn't there. Despite her tears, my ex-husband yelled at me without hearing my side. She claimed to want to get along, but every time we met, she only spoke ill of me. She'd say things like, "My son seems to have lost weight lately. Is it because your cooking is so bad that he can't eat properly?" This happened both at home and outside, making it impossible for us to get along. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law joined in, laughing at my expense. I can't deal with people who act like this anymore. No matter what they say, my feelings won't change. I can't help them, so I'm ending this call now. I hung up the phone and blocked the new number, knowing my ex-husband might change it to try to reach me again. To prevent this, I planned to change my phone number at the store over the weekend. But before I could do that, those 4 individuals broke the promise made by the lawyer and showed up at my house unannounced at 10 p.m. They banged on the door, yelling without regard for the late hour. I called out, "What's going on at this hour? Please go back home. You're disturbing the neighbors." When I went to open the door, they seemed poised to barge in, so I decided to communicate through the intercom instead. However, the 4 of them didn't care and continued banging on the door, causing a ruckus. I couldn't believe I was dealing with people so out of control. Frustrated, I contemplated calling the police. Suddenly, I heard sirens nearby, suggesting that a neighbor had intervened. The group, taken aback by the sudden sound of police sirens, attempted to flee. Unfortunately, a gathering of onlookers had already formed outside, blocking their escape. As a result, the responding officers escorted all 4 individuals to the police station. I was questioned about the incident and provided all the necessary details. The news about my ex-husband and his friend's actions quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. It turned out that one of my ex-husband's colleagues was among the group, and by the following day, everyone at the office knew about the situation. Already struggling with a reduced salary, my ex-husband's involvement with the police only exacerbated his difficulties at work. He ended up losing his job, which meant he couldn't afford his apartment anymore. This financial turmoil caused a rift between him and his sister's family, resulting in them no longer living together. Now, Bob resides in government-assisted housing with his mother, juggling several part-time jobs to cover their expenses. Even his mother, facing her own financial challenges, has taken up part-time work a few days a week, desperately trying to make ends meet.